culture comes into existence, any culture, not just business culture. A culture comes into existence whenever a group of people share the same basic living circumstances. And they band together to share beliefs about the common rules of survival and emotional prosperity so everyone can be safer. So how do we survive all living in the same jungle, in the same tribe, with the same chief? And then knowing we're going to be okay, how do we get rewarded emotionally and avoid punishment? A culture is a self-protective organism that obsessively collects information, attempts to vet it, and then shares it amongst itself. And so that's a culture. It's a self-protective organism. And so if you look at an employee culture as an example, an employee culture is an independent organism living right inside the enterprise with its own purpose and all the power to make or break any management plan and any manager. Now, its purpose is not to do that. It's not anti-management. It's not anti-business, anti-revenue. It's just anti-unsafe. So anything it perceives as unsafe, it's going to reject. So its motives are actually pure. It's the most rational organism in the world. And it will give you whatever you want. You just have to give it what it wants first. And that's the key. It's not the responsibility of your culture to understand the business logic. It's the responsibility of your business to understand the culture's logic. There are three cultures in any business. These three groups, by the way, are deciding the success of your company while I say this sentence. Because if they want something to happen, it's going to happen. If they don't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. You have an employee culture, which is the way companies usually consider their culture, their employees. But you also have a manager culture. The rules for survival and emotional prosperity and the sources of information, the vetting process is different for managers. It's enough where they are distinct from the general employee population. You also have a customer culture in your business, because what customers have in common is an often dependent relationship with the company. And so that has created this self-protective organism. And all of these cultures operate the same way for the same reasons. And so the key to running a successful business is to understand how a culture really works and how to really work it. Because then you can apply a lot of these same rules to being just as successful in gaining the commitment of your customer culture or your manager culture as you can your employee culture. When we are asked to come in to solve a cultural issue like that's really threatening the performance of the business, we can usually trace the origin to the company's declaration of official values. It's kind of like the gateway drug to cultural detachment. And the reason is that when values are declared by a company, they're presented as absolutes to the culture. If you want to know the absolute DNA of this company, it is in these 3, 5, 7 words. And so a culture naturally expects them to be absolutely protected. And if that ever isn't the case in reality or in perception, but it's often not the case, these are values or some unaudited aspirational statement that just appears on walls and posters and screensavers and mouse pads. It's not necessarily connected to the things the company truly cares about most, that where it will protect and promote these regardless of stress or temptation to compromise. And in fact, sometimes they're not even values at all. They're strategies for market domination. And one of the ways you tell the difference between a strategy and a value is that put pressure on both and see what happens. If you put pressure on a strategy, the strategy may well change. I mean, market conditions change, there's new pressure, you change the strategy. That's an adept strategic team is supposed to do that. You put pressure on a real value, people fall on it with their lives to stop it from changing. And values are human things. And a culture is a human organism. It understands the difference between strategies and values, but it doesn't really get it presented this way. So it's presented again as absolutes. The culture expects it to be absolutely protected. And when that doesn't happen, you've taken the most profound of human concepts, which are values, and you pitched it to the most profound of human organisms, which is a culture. Trust is fractured at a very deep level. What you want your culture to do and how you want it done and why you want it done is never as important as why not. Given the corporate logic and urgency of anything you're asking a culture to do, including we must act in integrity, internally, customer facing, whatever, we must act in integrity. Why would your culture not give its full commitment to that? If your culture is not giving its full commitment to a fundamental human behavior, it's got reasons. It's got reasons that it believes it's not safe and sane to do that. And it believes it has empirical data to prove that to itself. So it's why not is to continue to beat the drum of like, really, it's just so patronizing to explain what integrity means. This is what integrity would look like. Are you kidding me? And a culture understands what integrity looks like. It has examples of where that's not a good idea. And so this is a corrective process. You're not going to just make this happen in one move. But the first thing to do is respect the culture. Don't blame the culture for how it's being treated. It's a pure reactive organism. It's reacting to the signals of survival and emotional prosperity in its environment. Because a culture exists to protect itself, it has to believe something is real in the company or it'll go insane. So at some point, every culture puts a stake in the ground to say, this is the way things are around here. So it can navigate around it. And as soon as it does that, it forms some of the major components of its belief system. Like, should we trust management when management talks? When we get reinforced for our good performance, does that mean we're safer in some extended way? When the company says this is the plan today, is it going to be the plan tomorrow? A lot of other components of the belief system. Now, your culture didn't try and get it wrong when it put that stake in the ground, but it could have. It only had the data it had and its ability to interpret it. It doesn't matter though. The stake goes in the ground, the belief system is formed. And because a culture is a human organism, like all of us human organisms, once we conclude something, we look for data to confirm our conclusions, not to contradict them. So even if the culture innocently got it wrong, it's now looking through that lens and it's finding what it believes are proof points to hardwire its belief system. As an example, let's say your company had an all hands meeting. Everybody's together because the executive team is going to present the bold go-to-market strategy for the company in the coming year. And the CEO and the team gets up there and goes through all this, and you got everybody in the company together, and they say, are there any questions? Expecting people to say, our only question is how soon can we just march off to this glorious future? But Bob stands up. Bob's a member, let's say, of the sales org. And Bob stands up and says, I have a question for the entire executive team. Did you all apply for your jobs or did you win them somehow? Because this has got to be the most boneheaded strategy I've ever heard of in my life. And I know everybody in this room feels the same way. You know, we understand in your own way you want the company to be successful. So here's what you need to do. Go away. The entire executive team, just go away for a month, and we in this audience will develop the strategy, because the difference is we've actually met our customers. And then we'll all come back together and we'll present it, and together we will march off to our glorious future. And Bob sits down. Now, 2 weeks later, Bob is fired. Now, Bob may have been fired because he was just a jerk about a lot of other things. Bob may have been fired because he wasn't making his number. Bob may have been fired because there was some reorg that he was left out of. But the culture has only 2 data points: stand up and speak your mind, get fired. Guess what it's never going to do again? What's important here is if you want integrity or any other behavior, you want more of it, you want it differently done, and whatever. The key is to focus on why not. And and recognize that a culture's motives are purely self-protective. It's just reacting to signals that it is perceived as dangerous to exhibit this behavior. And look to yourself as a company. Don't be blaming the culture for its reaction. And recognize to just keep hammering on what a definition or application of integrity is really just, it's like pejorative to a culture. You don't need to do that. The culture will give you anything you want. You just have to give it what it wants first. And what it wants is a clear indication that these are safe behaviors that will also allow it to avoid punishment and get rewarded emotionally.
So sin number 2 is a presumption of rapid behavioral change.
What does any strategic or organizational change do? It messes with the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. So I used to know my job. Now you're changing that job. I have to re-earn my competence. Unsafe. I used to know people. I knew people. They knew me. We had history together. Now we're being reorged. I don't have those relationships anymore. Unsafe. I used to know what my bonus meant when I got it, and more importantly, if I didn't get it. Now you have some groovy new comp program, and the ceiling is much higher, but I don't know what it means. Unsafe. So first thing is to recognize it's not that a culture hates change. It's that a culture hates the loss of the known that change represents, the known rules of survival and emotional prosperity. And so just as quickly as we can march through this, here's the thing to do: to recognize that when change hits the culture, it's live. The C-suite clock has started long before the culture's clock gets started. When the culture gets the change, it's supposed to hear about it, understand it, embrace it, and translate it into action all in about the same 60 seconds, because now it's live. And so any change, even good change, logical change, is an uncomfortable reminder to your culture about how little control it's got over its work life. So your culture naturally loses perspective. Well, we didn't see this change coming. Who knows what else is going to change? Maybe anything, maybe everything. Your culture has all the intellectual and emotional firepower to deal with any change at all, unless it believes that everything could be changing. It doesn't even know how many fronts it can open a battle on to protect itself. So when you are explaining what is changing to your culture, you must take the time to explain what isn't changing to your culture. So yeah, this is different. We're not doing that. No, we're over here now. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. But here's who we have always been. Here's who we still are. And here's who we will always be. A manager's emotional commitment is worth more than their financial, intellectual, and physical commitment combined. It translates into managers taking on company success like a personal crusade. But the source of emotional commitment in any human being is their ability to live their own values in a relationship or environment. So your managers need to be able to do that in the relationship with the company and the environment at work. There is simply no better way to secure the protective evangelism of your managers and cause them to ignite the same thing in the people that work for them.